Imagine you are completely alone. The night is absolute. Your family is on the other side of the river. Your past is behind you. Now imagine something grabs you in the dark. Not a man, not an animal, something else. And instead of running, you fight back. One story in the ancient world where a human being physically wrestles with God and refuses to let go until he receives a blessing. He doesn't win through strength. He doesn't win through righteousness. He wins through something far more radical than either of those things. And when it's over, he walks away with a limp that he carries for the rest of his life. For 4,000 years. This is not just the story of Jacob. This is the story of every person who has ever fought with their own soul and lived to see morning.
The story of Jacob appears in the book of Genesis, chapters 25 through 33. But don't let the familiarity of that fool you. This is not Sunday school material. This is a gritty, decades-long saga of family dysfunction, deception, trauma, and ultimately transformation. Jacob lived approximately 1800 BCE in a world where identity was everything. Your name, your birthright, your father's blessing, these weren't symbolic. They were legal, spiritual, and economic reality. To steal a blessing in that world was closer to identity theft than a moral failing. It reshaped your entire destiny. Here's what's remarkable. The Bible never sanitizes Jacob. Other ancient traditions whitewash their founding fathers. The Hebrew scriptures don't. Jacob is introduced as a schemer from the womb. And the text is honest about it. That honesty is itself theologically radical. It's saying God works through broken people, not despite them, but through the very cracks in them.
We're not going to simply retell the story. What I want to do today is peel back the layers, the psychological layers, the theological layers, the human layers, and find out what was actually happening the night Jacob wrestled at the Jabbok River. Because here's what most people miss. Jacob's wrestling match didn't been building for his entire night. To understand why a man would grab God by the collar and refuse to let go, you have to understand who Jacob was, what he'd done, and what he was about to face.
Think about what this moment cost. Yes, Jacob gained the blessing, but what did he gain with it? A brother who now wants him dead, a father whose final act of intimacy was built on a lie, and a life spent looking over his shoulder. Psychologists who study shame and identity note something crucial. When you acquire what you need through deception,
You can never fully own it. There's always a voice inside that says, "This isn't really yours, you didn't earn it, you stole it." Jacob lived with that voice for 20 years.
he ran from his brother. He worked for his uncle Laban, only to be deceived himself in return, in what is perhaps the most poetic piece of divine irony in the whole Bible. The great deceiver gets deceived. He works 7 years for the woman he loves, and on the wedding night, Laban switches the bride. This is not coincidence. The Jacob narrative is structured like a mirror. Every act of deception Jacob commits is eventually reflected back at him. The text is making a profound argument. You cannot escape the consequences of who you are. Not geographically. Not through hard work. Not through marriage or success. Eventually, your unresolved self comes back, and it comes back at the worst possible moment.
The Bible says he came out of the womb gripping his twin brother Esau's heel, as if he knew even then that the world had already promised everything to someone else. Esau was first. Esau was favored by their father Isaac. Esau was the hunter, physical, present, the kind of son that fills a tent with the smell of wild game and easy laughter. Jacob was the quiet one, the thinker, his mother's favorite. And here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Jacob deceives his dying, nearly blind father into giving him the blessing meant for Esau. He wears his brother's clothes. He puts goat skin on his arms to feel hairy. He lies to his father's face, and Isaac, trembling, confused, gives him the blessing anyway.
20 years have passed. Jacob is wealthy now. He has wives, children, livestock beyond counting. By any external measure, he is a success. But then comes word. Esau is coming. With 400 men. 400 men. That's not a greeting party, that's an army. Jacob sends his entire family across the Jabbok River to safety. He arranges them in order. The women he loves least in front. The ones he loves most at the back. An act that reveals everything about him. Strategic even in his terror.
And then he is alone, completely alone. The Bible says it simply, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. No explanation, no announcement. Just someone grabs Jacob in the dark, and the fight begins.
Here's what we need to sit with. Jacob's aloneness in this moment is not incidental. The text is deliberate. He sends everyone away, and then, and only then, does the encounter happen. In the psychology of transformation, there is a well-documented phenomenon. The moment of reckoning rarely comes in public. It comes in solitude. It comes in the dark, when there is no performance left. No audience, no role to play. Just you and whatever it is inside you that you haven't faced yet. Jacob had been running from his brother for 20 years. But that's not actually who he was running from. He was running from himself, from the part of himself that had cheated and lied and taken what wasn't his. And now, at the Jabbok, with no family to protect him and an army coming at dawn, he had nowhere left to run. The word Jabbok in Hebrew shares its root with the word for wrestling, Jabbok. Scholars who study ancient Hebrew geography argue this may not be coincidental. The location itself has meaning baked into its name. It's as if the text is saying this place was always waiting for Jacob. This night was always written into the story. Some confrontations cannot be postponed forever. They can only be delayed until the last possible moment.
Everyone talks about the wrestling match, but almost nobody asks the question that makes this story truly radical. Why would God, or an angel of God, lose to a human being? Think about this for a moment. If this being was divine, why did the match last all night? Why didn't Jacob simply collapse? Why does the text say the being couldn't overpower him? And why is the part that haunts me? Why does the being ask Jacob to let him go? Something profound is happening here, and it's not about physical strength.
Ancient rabbinical scholars wrestled with this passage for centuries, pun absolutely intended. One school of thought held that the being deliberately limited itself, that this wasn't a real contest of power but a contest of will. That God, or the divine messenger, could have ended this at any moment but chose not to, because what Jacob needed wasn't to be overpowered again. His whole life, he had been acquiring things through cunning, through force of will, through manipulation. What he needed, what he had never experienced, was to stay in a difficult place and refuse to give up. The struggle was the point. The all-night duration was the point. The refusal to release was the point. There's a concept in depth psychology called the necessary ordeal. The idea that certain transformations can only happen through sustained, unrelenting struggle. You cannot think your way into them. You cannot be gifted them. You have to go through a night that tests whether you're capable of holding on when every instinct says let go. Jacob's wrestling match is one of the oldest archetypes of this pattern in recorded literature. It is not a story about winning. It is a story about endurance, choosing itself again and again until dawn.
So the match goes on all night, and somewhere in the darkness, the being touches Jacob's hip socket and dislocates it. The fight continues. Think about what that means physically. Jacob is now wrestling with a dislocated hip, in agony, unable to plant his foot properly, and still he does not let go. This is the moment the story reveals its deepest layer, because the being says something extraordinary. You have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome. Not you are strong, not you are righteous, not you are perfect. You struggled, and you did not stop.
The dislocated hip is not a punishment. This is critical to understand. It is a marker. In ancient cultures, wounds received in sacred encounters were considered seals. The encounter was genuine and permanent. Jacob's limp would be visible to everyone who saw him walk for the rest of his life. It was a testimony written into his body. But there's another layer here. Consider this. Before this night, Jacob had always taken what he wanted through cunning. He never put himself in a position of vulnerable, embodies struggle. He used his mind, not his hands. The wrestling match is the first time he is raw, exposed, physically compromised, and he still refuses to give up. This is not the Jacob who stole a birthright. This is not the Jacob who tricked his father. This is someone being fundamentally reformed. And reformation, as anyone who has been through a true transformation knows, is rarely painless. Here is something scholars rarely highlight. When the being touches Jacob's hip, the Hebrew word is naga. It means to touch, but also to strike, and in some contexts, to afflict. This same word describes divine encounters that leave permanent marks. What a profound truth. The text is saying that intimacy with the divine is not always gentle. Sometimes it breaks something in you, not to destroy you, but to end the way you were walking before. Jacob's old stride's confident, scheming walk is finished. That night marked a change. His new walk is slower, deliberate, more marked.
As dawn approaches, Jacob still refuses to release his grip, and the being asks him, "What is your name?" This is a question that has already been asked of Jacob in this story. When his blind father asked him, "Who are you, my son?" Jacob lied. He said, "I am Esau." "What is your name?" Now, in the dark, with a dislocated hip, having wrestled all night, the question comes again. And this time, Jacob tells the truth. Jacob,
which in Hebrew means he who supplants, he who grabs the heel, the deceiver. He confesses who he is, what he has always been in the dark, to a divine presence, with nothing left to hide behind. And the being says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans, and you have overcome."
In the ancient world, renaming was not ceremonial. It was ontological, a change in essential nature. To be renamed was to become a different person. Abram became Abraham. Simon became Peter. And Jacob the deceiver became Israel, one who wrestles with God. Or in some translations, God strives. Suggesting that it was also God wrestling with Jacob, not just Jacob wrestling with God. Think about what it means that the nation that carried this story, Israel, a nation that has survived millennia of exile, persecution, and diaspora, is named not after a victory but after a struggle. Not God conquers, not God blesses, but God wrestles. The identity of an entire people is encoded in the image of a man who refused to let go in the dark. There is one final detail that most retellings rush past. After Jacob crosses the river at sunrise, he meets Esau, the brother who wanted him dead. Esau runs to him, embraces him, weeps on his neck. The 20-year wound between them heals in a moment. And Jacob says something extraordinary to his brother. "To see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably." After wrestling with God all night, Jacob looks at his estranged brother's face and sees God. The divine encounter at the river didn't just change Jacob's walk. It changed what he saw. When he looked at other people, that is what real transformation does. It doesn't just make you stronger. It gives you new eyes. Here is what I want you to take from this story. Jacob did not become Israel because he was good. He became Israel because he was honest, finally, absolutely, devastatingly honest, and came for him about who he was. And he refused to walk away from the encounter without something real. We live in a world that tells you transformation is supposed to feel good. That if you're doing the work correctly, it should flow. It should be gentle. There should be a clean arc from darkness to light. Jacob's story says something different. It says that before your breakthrough might look like the worst night of your life. That the encounter that changes you might leave you limping. That the moment you finally tell the truth about who you are, even to yourself, especially to yourself, might be the most terrifying thing you ever do. And that the limp you walk away with is not evidence that you failed. It is evidence that you stayed. And when morning finally came, Jacob crossed the Jabbok as a deceiver running from his past. He crossed back as Israel, walking toward his brother, walking toward reconciliation, walking into the rest of his story, with a wound he would carry forever, and a name that 4,000 years later still echoes across the world. He wrestled with God. He didn't win by being stronger. He won by refusing to let go. And when morning finally came, it came for him. I want to ask you something before you go. What is the Jabbok in your life right now, the crossing you've been circling but haven't faced? What is the encounter you've been sending everyone else ahead of, waiting alone in the dark? Leave it in the comments. I genuinely read them. And if this story moved something in you, share it with someone who's in the middle of a long night. Sometimes knowing someone else wrestled and made